in terms of real estate, in terms of building a business, in terms of any of these things. And so I failed, and I failed a lot. And looking back now, I'm so grateful for those failures because they taught me so much. Yes, investing in yourself is super important, but when you let compounding do its magic and you're starting in your 20s or 30s or even in your 18s, 19s, that cannot be understated, the value of that compound interest.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Walks to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself a favor and give us a follow because I don't want you guys to get FOMO from all the amazing guests we're bringing on this year. So let's get right into this interview. Barbara, for anyone who hasn't gotten the opportunity to get to know you, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so most people who meet me today know me as someone who owns a woman-owned and operated high-end construction company in the heart of Manhattan. What they don't know is that I spent 2 decades working in the service industry, often in times in tandem with my other construction jobs. And that service industry work really impacted me. So I spent 20 years working all across the country. I was a waitress, I was a bartender, I was a stripper, I was a go-go dancer, I was a cater waiter, I was a flair bartender, I was a sideshow showgirl, I was a circus performer, you name it. If it involved tips, I did it. And somewhere around the time of 2013, I moved to New York City with my wife, $700 in my pocket. And I got 2 jobs. And the first job I got was as a coyote, working at Coyote Ugly. So I was singing and dancing on the bar. And then I got another job working days on Wall Street. And it was for an unregulated firm that was part trading floor and part independent sales organization selling usurious loan products, loan sharking, some really gross stuff. So that gave me a really big education in the markets, in financial services. And after about 6 months, I left that job. I was like, this is way too toxic. Our third trader had gotten shipped off to rehab. And I was like, oh my gosh, Wall Street's way too toxic for me. I'm going back to bars and construction. And so I found myself working for a construction company that managed to offer a lot of benefits to employees. And it was in seeing those benefits that I realized that people who work in the service industry are left out of the wealth building world. And that prompted me to start my brand and write my book, Tip.
And that's an amazing story. And let's say go back in the time machine a little bit further and take us back to little Barbara. What was it like growing up? What were you thinking as a child? Were you, aspiring all these big dreams all the things you have going on now? What was it like growing up in your childhood?
Yeah, so we grew up lower middle income in a little suburb outside of Detroit. My dad worked for an auto plant. He worked for Ford Motor Company. My mom was disabled and she was a stay-at-home parent until the age of 12. At the age of 12, she moved out and I was left to care for myself and a father who mostly worked nights and whose substance use was growing worse and worse. And so it was a challenging time, my childhood. But it was peppered with me not knowing any better because all of the kids around me had similar stories and similar backgrounds. And so financially, we weren't doing well. My parents modeled debt. The debt cycle was modeled, but at the same time, they also modeled homeownership, which was a real gift to me. At the age of 19, I purchased the house that I grew up in after my dad passed away. It was 100% finance. And I had ended up making an offer that was more than twice the price that the previous owners had paid for it. So it was a stupid decision to purchase this house. Then to add to it, I spent the next year maxing out 10 credit cards to renovate the house myself as a way to kind of honor my dad. So I put myself into a terrible financial situation early on, which is kind of what led me to wanting to work in the service industry. Was I needed quick access to cash. I was being chased by creditors. I needed space and time to kind of clean up the financial mess that I had made because financial literacy was not a part of my journey. It wasn't a part of my upbringing. No one taught us anything about money. We were taught hard work.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So you're 19, you 100% finance at home, max out 10 credit cards. What was that like? What was it like during that time period, running up all these bills, knowing that these, people are out to get their money back and get their payments, back? What was it like navigating the world at that time, that young?
Yeah, so I was working as a receptionist at a general contractor's office, which is, I think, what kind of gave me the delusion that I could do some of this stuff myself. I was like, oh, I work for a GC. Clearly, I can do a lot of this work myself. They do it, and some of them are idiots. Or so I thought at the time. And so I had this false sense of delusional confidence at the age of 19. And this was before YouTube or Pinterest or anything. I was at the library looking up how to mix concrete and, how to repair fences and look at plumbing and all these things. So I think in my head, I was just focused on, you know, I wanted to restore the house to what it was when my parents first met, like kind of when I was a happy kid. And that was what was in my head, was just like making this house the home that I wish it had been for the last 10 years or so. And so that's all I had on my mind was grief and, you know, focusing on trying to repair some of that heartache.
Yeah, no, that is, I can only imagine how hard that must have been on you. And when you were going through this process, what was it like navigating having this weight kind of on your shoulders now that you kind of have to fend for yourselves? You have to, a lot of the times when, even just in life in general, and like entrepreneurship, a lot of times we're embarking on this track, we're heading on this track, this trajectory that not a lot of people have trekked, and not a lot of people will ever even attempt to trek or head down. And you end up kind of getting thrown to the wolves. You kind of end up having to fend for ourselves. What have you learned through your experience of, you know, figuring it out, fending for yourself, going on this journey, this path that most people, and even if it's just at that point in time, it was hospitality and then the receptionist, but it's like, what was it like having to just figure it out, just fend for yourself, going down this path that most people could only imagine, you know, what it was like?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting being, you know, on the other side of it now is that at the time I was like, there's no way I will be successful having worked in the service industry. There's no way that I will be successful having failed at real estate. There's no way I will be successful. I wrote myself off. And in a lot of ways, I just dropped everything and left because I couldn't handle the pressures of it at the age of 19. I didn't have the tools to navigate it. I didn't know anyone who had done similar things that I could reach out to and ask for advice. I didn't have any community in terms of real estate, in terms of building a business, in terms of any of these things. And so I failed, and I failed a lot. And looking back now, I'm so grateful for those failures because they taught me so much. I like to say everything I needed to know to own and run a multi-million-dollar business, I learned failing and working in the service industry. You know, you learn so many skills and you don't really feel or understand the impact until a little bit of time passes.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's hard to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel when all that you're currently walking through right now is darkness, and it can get really dark. So let me actually, to make our first segue into today's conversation, the service industry. I'm still in there myself right now. I work at a restaurant. I'm a food runner. I've been there approaching, by the time this comes out, it'll be 3 years now. So a little bit of time now, and hopefully as well, by the time this comes out, I'm also gone from the service industry and this real estate, this entrepreneur stuff starts taking off. So, you know, what did you learn? I've learned, for me, for the most part, I've learned to be very social, very, you know, how to deal with people on a very wide spectrum of people. Like there's a lot of personalities and that'll come across in a restaurant, especially, it's like my restaurant's also a pretty much a nightclub and on the weekend. So that there's a bunch of people that you get to meet that are drunk as well. So that just adds a whole lot more personality and variables and ego. I also learned a lot about tipping and how important that is. And I also wasn't raised growing up to restaurants, going out to eat. So I never really understood how tipping worked. But what were some of the biggest takeaways that you learned from being in the, you know, service/hospitality industry? I've been able to take away a lot. So what have you specifically taken away?
Yeah, I think for people who do work in the service industry, you often aren't spoken to about the skills that you are learning. There's no, you know, forum or anyone who's talking about those, but you are slowly acquiring a lot of skills. And you just mentioned the most important one, which is social and people skills. You learn to manage and navigate a lot of different types of personalities, and you learn to manage them as a resource. Who can I use to my advantage? Who can I talk to? You learn the ability to network. You learn the ability to, you know, maybe use your manager as a resource. You learn quality control. You are running, oftentimes when you're in the service industry, you're running a lot of the back of the envelope math. Like, okay, this is how many tables I did. How many turns do I need to get over the course of these next 5 hours in order to make $100 so that I can pay my rent? How many bar seats do I need to rotate in order to make this amount or make that amount? How many dances do I need to dance? How many how many shifts this week do I need to do in order to make what I need to make? And so you're constantly doing that back of the envelope math. And that's what entrepreneurs are doing. They're constantly doing back of the envelope math. They're constantly trying to navigate their resources. They're constantly managing different types of personalities. Additionally, when you're in the service industry, a lot of people who are in it are in that sales position where they're upselling constantly, whether it's beverages, whether it's food items, whether it's dances, whether it's haircuts or products or whatever else. But a lot of that is the sales side of it. And you become good at selling. And that is what you need as an entrepreneur. You need to know how to sell. You need to know how to close. And that's a skill set that you definitely learn. So I always like to remind people, you're learning a lot of these skills. You're highly skilled. You're getting a real Harvard Business School education in those trenches, and to not discount yourself or count yourself out just because your experience doesn't look like a traditional path that maybe other people take.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I feel like a lot of people aren't appreciative of it. And I think at the age of my listeners, maybe a little bit younger, like high school as well, if you can get into a restaurant of some sort, like by all means do it, because you'll get so much more money than getting paid minimum wage. And I try to tell my group chat a while ago, and of me and a couple of my guys that I grew up with, and I was like, maybe years back, I think it was my freshman year in college, which actually wasn't all that long ago. So not too many years back, but I was trying to tell them like, hey, you guys are probably looking for the summer, like a restaurant job. And it's like, and they kind of just brushed it off. And it's like, yeah, you make like $6 per hour, but in tips, you make more than what some people with, actual degrees from college make. And it's like hard to kind of grasp that idea, not looking, because all they see is the per hour, the guaranteed. And it just goes to show like that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people also don't hop into entrepreneurship, because they only see the stability. And if you're going into entrepreneurship for the stability, by all means, get out, at least when you're starting, because it doesn't get stable until you get it rolling. But the restaurant industry, $6 an hour, especially where I live in the Northeast, you're not paying any bills or making any ends meet with that, even if you get overtime, right?
Yeah,
but with tips,
I was just going to say, I think it's important for us to also talk about the fact that federally, the subminimum wage for tipped workers is actually $2.13. You may live in a state where your pay is a little bit better, but federally, this group of workers are still dealing with the $2.13 federal wage. But tips are on top of that, and it's supposed to compensate for that, which is not always the case. But for me, when I worked in the industry, I never had an income problem, right? For me, and that's not to say that people in this industry don't have an income problem. There's definitely people in the industry who are experiencing poverty and experiencing hardship. But for me, it was a money management problem. It was a mindset problem. It was an environmental boundary problem that was not getting my money moving in the right direction. So that's one thing I always like to talk about is like, you're right. You're getting a lesson in entrepreneurship when you're working in the service industry. It's a great way to step your toe into it for the first time and to see like, oh, how will I deal with managing my money on a fluctuating income? How will I deal with all of these different variables?
And it's like stuff that you learn, as you said, like as you're experiencing it, which is always the best way to learn and go and do it and figure it out while you're in it. And not off the back of a book or something like that. So let me ask you, so now you're getting into hospitality or the restaurant industry, and you still have all these bills. What was that tipping point for you where things started to turn around? Like take us back to that point in time where it's like, all right, you have all these loans, these bills, these credit cards. You're now, picking up all these jobs. At what point did it go from, hey, I just need to survive and make ends meet, to, okay, how do I actually get myself out of this and start catching my stride?
Yeah, I think it was a slow projection. The first step was me kind of getting out of my environment. So I left Detroit and I moved to Los Angeles, and I lived in a studio apartment with 3 other women. I responded to Craigslist ads for anything that paid cash because I had creditors chasing me and I didn't want my wage garnished. So I was working those cash jobs, so many random jobs. But I think through like that, living with multiple people, I saw the potential of keeping your expenses low. I saw the ability of increasing your income. And so that was kind of maybe like the first step. And then, you sort of sprinkle in things slowly, like, oh, I started maybe saving a little bit. I was always really good at saving. I just never knew what long-term goals were. I didn't know to save for retirement. I didn't even think about retirement. I was like, I like what I do. I'll probably do it forever. But it was slowly building up that awareness of like, oh, I do have the capacity to save for this big trip or this big move or this big thing. And therefore I have the capacity to save. And so that was like, it was slowly building these small awareness, milestones and building on top of them over time.
Yeah. And let me ask you, in the money management department, well, how do you manage to figure that out? As you said, so for me, I'm a food runner, which is why I make a little bit more per hours. Our servers, they make like 2 something. But so it's like, what are some money management tips for anyone that wants to get started, at least in the restaurant industry, while they figure out this entrepreneurship game? I think it's great because one, at least for me, the restaurant I work at, it's very flexible in terms of picking up shifts, dropping shifts, and finding coverage. It's also something where I get to set my schedule, like, hey, I can only work weekends, or hey, I work Monday through Friday. So I'm very fortunate that I'm at a restaurant that allows me the flexibility to do so that I can figure out this entrepreneur game out. But for anyone that's getting in the restaurant industry, what are some tips you can give them on that money management side of things? Or even if they're not in the restaurant industry, what are some like just general like money management tips that someone could use to start keeping their money in order?
Yeah. The biggest thing I always hear from like coaching clients is like, yeah, but my income's so inconsistent. I never know how much I'm going to make. And I'm like, yes, nor does any other company in the United States. No company knows what they're going to make, nor do they have the same amount of income 2 months in a row. So you have examples all around you of companies with fluctuating incomes, and you can mirror what they do. I'm so lucky to be married to a woman who does financial planning and analysis for a publicly traded company. So we get to talk about this and geek out and nerd out. And what she does for her Fortune 500 companies that she's worked for is they look for trends. Once they identify trends, they make guesses. And then after time passes, they look back and they see if those guesses were right, and then they make adjustments. And that's exactly what people in the service industry or any entrepreneur, or anyone working on a gig or consulting, any variable income needs to stay focused on. You look for trends. There's always trends. Even if you say there's no trends, there's trends. We're not talking about the difference between $7 a year and $7 million. It's closer than that. When you really start to break it down, it's a lot closer. So for people who work at a restaurant that maybe has a patio, you know that your summers are going to be busier. You're going to spot that trend. And so therefore, you're going to build up buffers in your summers to be able to take on those harder winters or maybe those slow periods. If you're a dancer, on the other hand, you're going to know that your club environments are going to be slower in the summer. Your sporting events are going to be slower. So you're going to start by looking for trends. And then once you identify those trends, then you're going to take guesses for what it's going to be like going forward. And then you're going to look back, track, see how you did on your guesses, and make adjustments. A lot of people assume that they have to budget based off of your income. But you do not have to budget based off your income. You can budget based off your expenses. If your expenses are what's more fixed than your income, then you set your budget based on what your most predictable expenses are, and then you create a few buffers around that. So tailoring that and looking at the other side of the coin, your money's going to look a whole lot different than most 9-to-5ers who get that traditional paycheck. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible for you to budget. It just means it's just a little bit harder. But we can do hard things.
Yeah. And I love it. And it goes so much into entrepreneurship because it's the same way. You're not going to have predictable income. You're not going to have predictable things, but you probably know how much your Zoom account cost or your video editing software costs per month or whatever it may be. It's like you can track those things, and every month it's like 15 on the 11th, or it's another $20 on the 14th, or it's like you have to pay $5 for your little, Amazon Prime book, what is it? Audible. There we go. I think it's like $11.99 a month on the whatever day of the month. It's like you could track those things and have that piled up, and it's super actionable, super practical. So let me ask you, so to go back to our timeline where you're at. So you started figuring this out. You started managing your money better. You started saving your money better. You're now in LA. Where did it go from there? You started picking up a lot of jobs to gather cash. And what point, what was the day that you finally achieved zero net worth? Like, what was the day where it's like, I don't owe anybody anything anymore? What was that day like for you?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know that I was I don't think I was financially literate enough at the time to have tracked it and to be aware of when that moment took place. It was just slowly kind of like trying to get better in all these other areas. And I moved around a ton. So I think the other thing about losing a parent at a young age is like I was panicked with the notion that life was short and I wanted to experience as much of it as possible. So I was moving around. I was running dance troupes. I was bartending. I was I was in Vegas, I was in New Orleans, I was in, Boston, I was in Detroit, I was in New York. Like I was living all over the country, having the time of my life. I wasn't so focused on money at that point, but I was making small strides. It wasn't until I got to New York that I really had a big aha moment about like, oh, this is why I haven't been able to seriously build wealth. This is why my peers haven't been able to build wealth. I didn't understand the impact of the safety nets that most traditional 9-to-5ers have. I didn't understand the impact of a 401k. I didn't understand the impact of health insurance. I didn't understand the impact of paid time off. People in the service industry don't have access to paid time off, even if cash flow wise, or even if state wise, their state mandates it. Cash flow wise, it never happens because it's eaten away in taxes. So one of the things that I tell people who are working on tips is like, let's look at your holiday season when holidays are really busy and you get a lot of tips. Use that time to bucket to give yourself paid time off for the next year. Make an extra $1,000 in the month of December. Spread that $1,000 into 10 envelopes of $100 each and pay yourself each time you want to take a day off, because PTO is not real for a lot of people in the industry. 90% of restaurants, bars, and clubs are owned by small independent operators who do not have access or resources to provide benefits. So you have to set up your own systems. And, same thing, like number one way that Americans build wealth is through their 401k. It's the number one way that Americans build wealth. And when you work in an industry where it's not provided, you just think that's not an option for you. You think, oh, I don't have access to a 401k, therefore I can't have a 401k. So to me, it's been really important to educate people in the industry. Like, nope, you can set up your own retirement accounts. You can set up your own brokerage accounts. And even if it's not tax deferred, you can still use those accounts for retirement. You can still set yourself up, because this industry can be hard on your body and you deserve a golden retirement.
Yeah, 100%. And so now you're in New York, you get this epiphany. It's like, all right, where does it go from there? When does Barbara go from working in all these different jobs to the, personal brand, the author, the entrepreneur, the business owner that you got going on, everything now? When did that shift happen?
Still working multiple jobs. My wife's like, Jesus Christ, like you have multiple properties, you own a multi-million-dollar business. Like, what are you doing? Why, But I think that work ethic was instilled in me at such a young age. I think probably 2013, 2014 was when I really started to get serious about my own money, and start to like really stack paper for myself. And then in 2016, the political climate in the US was a little bit of a mess. And I just could not stomach the news cycle. So I turned everything off and I was like, I'm just going to listen to like personal finance content. And because that's all I could stomach at the time. And I started getting introduced to like the FIRE community and all these other ideas. And that's just when I was like, oh, there's this whole umbrella of personal finance out there. And no one is talking to these people who work in the service industry. And so that's when I was just like, this book is very mission-based for me. My coaching practice is very mission-based for me. I charge $30 for a half-hour coaching call. Like that does not even cover my website costs. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, it was just about helping people that need it. Like I wrote the book that I wish that I had had when I was 20, because I'd be retired by now. I would have been easily retired by now.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Craig, one of the quotes that I live by comes from Plato's allegory of the cave. And those who listen probably heard me say it a trillion times, but to tell to you is the duty of the enlightened is to enlighten the unenlightened. And you could have very well just figured the game out, played the game, got yours, and then just relax. Go off with your wife and enjoy life, travel, whatever it is that you guys like to do, and just live, to yourselves. But you took it upon yourself. It's like, nah, this issue is bigger than me. I got to help not just myself, I got to help everyone else that's out there that's struggling and doesn't know about this stuff. What does it look like to kind of shoulder the world almost essentially? Because as I said, this is bigger than you now. This is not just, hey, I want to help a couple people nearby, get their money right. It's like, no, you want to help these people in this industry level up, evolve, so they can get this golden retirement that you mentioned, so that they can increase their wealth, so that they have a shot at this American dream or whatever you'd like to call it, right? And just play this game at a bigger level. What was that like? When did you make the decision to, and what kind of sparked the decision to like, hey, let me take this upon myself to turn this into something bigger and to turn this into a mission?
Yeah. I mean, that took a little bit longer, right? So 2016 had that epiphany of like, no one is talking to these people. And so I started researching our community. There's over 5.5 million people working on tips in the United States. It's the second largest employment sector in the United States. They age into the most economically disadvantaged in our population. I'm looking at this wealth industry. I'm looking at the personal finance space, and I'm seeing it's really broken up into the haves and the have-nots. And I'm honestly I'm not here for that. Like, if I can DIY this by listening to podcasts and reading books and doing all of this, then I'm going to make it a hell of a lot easier for other people to get there. And they don't have to listen to the 10,000 hours of stuff that I listen to in order to distill it down. But it took a while because I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I didn't graduate from college. I don't have any financial credentials. Who am I to write a personal finance book? Well, when I realized that no one was talking to these people, I'm like, well, I'm one person that can be talking to these people. And I remember listening to a podcast and somebody had said, write the book you wish you had had. And I was like, I can at least do that. I can at least be one voice, one person talking to this group of people. I may not be the best or the most qualified, but I can keep it real, and someone's going to need that.
Yeah, I love that, keeping it real and that having that authenticity and the vulnerability to share your journey. And it's like, hey, I screwed up a ton. I learned a ton. I figured it out. Here's what I got for you guys so that you guys don't have to go through everything that I've gone through. And it's one of like the most honorable things most people could do, because a lot of times, I mean, of course, there's some people out there like J.K. Rowling and people like that they have a lot of money from selling books. But for majority of the people, I think the top 10 books have like the majority of like all book sales in like ever. So it's like most people that are writing books, it's something that really, drives them. And so let me ask you, now that you've kind of made it to the other side of the journey, of course, you're still on it. What are some of the biggest tips, of course, without giving away your entire book, but what are some of the things that you would actually tell yourself if you could have gone back in time to help you move further along in your journey? My connection, oh my goodness, what happened to my connection? My internet, for whatever reason, it's flared out of control. Did you hear anything I said? If not, I'll just pick up and edit this part out.
Yeah, maybe just repeat your last question for me.
Yeah, so so now that you're on the other side of this journey, and of course you're still always on your journey, what does it look like now? What's changing the restaurant industry? What are some of the biggest tips that you could help young, aspiring entrepreneurs / restaurant industry workers that are trying to, make their ends meet while also figure out this game of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think the first thing I always tell people in this industry is that an emergency fund is essential. And I think most people figured that out during COVID, that they needed to have a bigger amount of savings in case. But, maybe we shouldn't be planning all of our financial decisions around a global pandemic. But when you work in service, you need to have that emergency fund more, because there's a power imbalance. You're waiting on someone else. You're serving somebody else. You have a new boss every hour, half hour, 45 minutes. And that power imbalance can mean that you lose autonomy to be able to make decisions and advocate for yourself. Because if you are reliant on somebody's tip in order to meet your basic needs or essentials, then you're in a really vulnerable position. But that emergency fund, when you're able to save up money, it gives you a little bit of that power back in that dynamic so that you can say no to maybe situations that are unsafe, walk out of environments that are, maybe a toxic boss or a toxic manager, or even just a toxic work shift. So giving yourself an emergency fund is one of the biggest gifts I think people in the industry can do for themselves. It really changes the dynamic of how you show up in your work, how you advocate for yourself, and how well you take care of yourself. So that's step number one. I always like to tell people you have to...
I was going to say, to add on to that point, because before you go on to the next one, because that's exactly why I'm not underwater right now. That is the only reason, is saving. For me, right before I got my real estate license, I was doing like 70 hours a week, 35 and 35 at K Jewelers and at the restaurant. And I was making, and so I still live with my grandparents, so I was making a lot more money than I needed and know what to do with. I mean, I know what to do with it, but a lot more money than what I needed. Because at that point in time, I don't think I have forgotten. Yeah, I didn't have my car yet. And I think that my cat was like only a few weeks old. I think like 2 months or 3 months old. So he wasn't eating as much food as he eats now. So there was that. So I was saving a ton, and all that money went straight into index funds. All of it. And I was saving. I got to the point where like I was almost saving like $4,000 a month almost. I think my best month, I think I saved like $6,000. I was getting after it. I was working a ton. Like every day felt like the same day almost, especially weekends. Because during the pandemic, my restaurant specifically, you couldn't, because it was a nightclub, at least the way the rules worked where I was at, you couldn't just have a bar and only serve drinks. You have to serve food. And so you had to pretty much keep the kitchen open for as long as you wanted the bar to be open. So the kitchen would be open. I would come in, clock in let's say I was doing a double on a Friday or Saturday, come in, clock in around 10:30, 11. And then I would work around 4-ish, 4:30, take like a 30-minute break. And then from 5 almost to like 2 in the morning, be working 2:30 in the morning, and then have to get up for Saturday and then do it again for Sunday. And then Monday, I had to be ready for 9 to get to K Jewelers, work till 4, go home, eat, and change to then be at the restaurant on Monday. It's like my whole life that summer, I don't really remember anything. It was just like every day was the same day. K Jewelers, go home, eat, change, restaurant, go home, shower, sleep. And it's like rinse, wash, repeat. But that excess money allowed me to build that savings. And honestly, if I hadn't built that up, I probably wouldn't have be here today. And it wasn't like, game-changing life, life-changing money, but it allowed me to stay afloat while I'm figuring out this entrepreneurship stuff. So I love that you mentioned that as the very first step, because that's something that was like, would have changed the entire course of all this stuff had I not saved any money. And it would have caused me to probably have to continue working like those insane hours to figure something out. I forgot what I was going with the second point, but I just wanted to mention that there because, the second point, sorry. Another thing, I hate when so many people that work on my job at the restaurant are so unappreciative. And of course, it's like the restaurant industry. And of course, there's a lot of BS you got to put up with. But it's like, I'm grateful for it. I'm super grateful for it because it gave me, an opportunity to make more money than I would have made at a regular job, more flexibility, more fun, free food. Like I sometimes, I don't drink anymore, but free drinks. It's like, it's what more can you ask for? And if you come in like 20 minutes late, no one's going to fire you. Of course, we're a little bit more, as you said, we're not like super super tight knit. So like there's also a downfall as well. But it's like, it allowed me to have so much opportunity and grow so much. So it's like, I'm super grateful for it. So sorry for interrupting, but yeah.
No, I think
that one's definitely helped me a lot.
You're making a lot of great points. Like there's a lot of unique opportunities and unique hazards to this industry. And those hazards and opportunities are not talked about nearly enough. People are not, people don't often think of these positions as career paths, which they absolutely can be. And they can also be amazing stepping stones that serve you where you need to be when you need to be. The great thing about the industry is that ability to enter and exit as you need. There's not a lot of industries where you can work more to make more, where you can get back into it if you need to, get back out of it when you need to. And I think that's one of the greatest features that it has for people who are willing to utilize it, is that flexibility of schedule, flexibility of being in it when you want to be in it, and that access to cash. If you're a real estate investor, the access that you can get to cash to be able to put a down payment on something is, there's no other industry that's handing you that type of cash all the time. So I think it's a great place for people who are trying to get serious about entrepreneurship or real estate or trying to build wealth. But you have to be diligent in those systems. And so savings is the first step in that system. The second step is investing. You have to be able to put money away. You have to put yourself first. When you're in a serving position, whether you're running food or bartending or waitressing or dancing or whatever, you're almost taught to put others' needs before your own. And you have to work on that mindset piece of like putting yourself first again. I remember so many shifts where I didn't even go to the bathroom because I was running around crazy. I didn't take a sip of water, right? Like I was just hopped up on coffee or cocktails or whatever, running a ship, not taking care of myself, taking care of everyone else. And that was just such a dangerous mindset to be in. Like you've got to invest in yourself first. And you do a beautiful job of this. Like you're taking your money and putting it into courses for yourself and not just like out there drinking drinks and having cocktails. And I think that that's an important mindset shift because in this industry, we often give ourselves the wrong trade-offs. We often ask ourselves the wrong questions. We're like, would I rather go out or would I rather not go out? If that's the question you're asking yourself, then you're always going to rather go out. But if you ask yourself bigger questions, like, would I rather not go out and give myself a maxed out Roth IRA, a trip to Mexico and be able to go out once a week, or would I rather go out 3 or 4 times a week? When you start asking yourself bigger, more strategic questions, you get to be more intentional.
Yeah. And, our brains, the way they work is they'll look for the answers, even if we don't have it in front of us. And as you look for the answers, more answers will show, which is kind of like weird how it works. And it's something I had to get used to, but it's like, if there's no answers available now, you have to start looking. And as you start looking, the answers will start to almost like appear magically onto your test sheet, right? And I love that you mentioned investing in yourself and not just like Roth, but also like courses, as you said. Like that's something that's super important, I feel. And a lot of times, like I made to this realization, I think index funds, me personally, were the best parking spot that I could have put my money. Because for me, it was growing and I've done pretty well on index funds. But like just this past February, I sold a bunch of it to get into an accelerated course because I need to grow myself. Because the money I'm making now, I can invest it in 60 years, I'll be a millionaire. But it's like, all right, for now, I'm investing it just as a parking spot so that when I find good opportunities to invest in myself and grow personally, because right now my highest ROI is in myself. The sooner I can figure out this entrepreneurship stuff, the sooner I can get it going, get more income. And then when I get more income, then I could invest per month what I currently have entirely in my index fund portfolio. And so it's like, but if had I not had it there, honestly, I would have been screwed for a lot of this. I would have never been able to go to any conferences. I would never have been able to go to any courses. I wouldn't have been able to get I might have been able to get my real estate license. Real estate license isn't that expensive. But a lot of the conferences I've gone to, I probably wouldn't have been able to go to any of them because conferences are a little priced.
It's
a great investment.
Yeah.
It can add up if you start going to multiple. It's like, but none of that would have been possible.
I definitely like the dual approach of investing in yourself and investing in future you, because compound growth, when you get to real investments, yes, investing in yourself is super important, but when you let compounding do its magic and you're starting in your 20s or 30s or even in your 18s, 19s, teens, like you have a younger audience, that cannot be understated, the value of that compound interest. And so I think people really need to take a dual approach of like, yes, absolutely. Now is the time to invest in yourself because your income is going to be the biggest thing that will contribute to you being able to build wealth. But also let some of that magic happen behind the scenes for you too, because that's really gonna take off and it's gonna be quite easy. I love that you talk about index investing because that's also my favorite approach to investing. I think for a lot of people in the service industry, a lot of them don't grow up with financial literacy and they don't grow up with a lot of education around money. And so I have a chapter on investing in my book. It's my favorite chapter. But in it, I like to talk about wine because people can get so deep into wine. You can get really, really deep into wine. You can talk about age and body and tannins and regions and notes and mouthfeel and the glass type and all of the things. You can get super, super, super into wine. But you don't need to get that into wine in order to have a great wine experience. You need to know a little bit about your tolerance, about what you want, and you can have a great wine experience without getting into the weeds. And the same is true for investing. You can get so deep into investing. You can talk about bell curves and PE ratios and Forex. There's so much to get into with investing, but you don't need to get that deep into investing in order to have a great investing experience. And that is the index funds. Index funds are you getting in and out with minimum. You don't need to worry about it. Buy the whole market, ride the ride with the market, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, and just wait and be patient.
Mm-hmm.
You know that over a long enough time horizon, you'll literally never lose. Unless the U.S. goes completely like bankrupt, bonkers, the whole country's in uproar and a riot and revolution starts.
Well, then we're not going to be worried about our money, will we?
Yeah, exactly at that point. And even if we were, what good would it do? Because it's like, hey, the whole country in a revolution, hey, I hand you $5 for a sandwich. You're probably not worried about, protecting your family. And most people who have businesses are going to abandon all of them. So yeah, it's one of those things. Barbara, I genuinely enjoyed our conversation today. Not many people that, kind of grew up in the restaurant industry or the service-based industry and made it out to do something that's bigger. From what I've experienced, and of course, everyone has their aspirations, their dreams, but from my personal experience and the people I've worked with in this industry, it's like very almost like middle of the road. A lot of these people's aspirations, like, yeah, I'm just doing this for right now. And then, and not to say this is a bad thing, but you've been able to take this on such a bigger level. You've been able to do so much more, which is like truly inspiring because and you're one step in your journey. You were literally where I am right now, working at restaurants, doing these double shifts and, working all these extra hours. And so like for me personally, it's super inspiring to know that you made it out, that you've seen the other end, that now you're on the end of like, hey, I'm giving back your book, your everything that's got going on. So from one person in the industry to another, I genuinely appreciate, your journey and what you got going on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
So where can we connect with you? Where can we find you at? If we wanted to learn more about your book, any more of your coaching that you offer, any of the stuff you have going on?
Yeah, thank you. The book's available on Amazon. You can just Google or search in the bar tipped or tipped book, and you'll find it. The subtitle is The Life-Changing Guide to Financial Freedom for Waitresses, Bartenders, Strippers, and All Other Service Industry Professionals. It's a mouthful, but tipped should get you there. You can find me on my website at www.tippedfinance.com, where I do one-on-one coaching. I also do some speaking engagements. You can find me for that. I'll come to your bar, club, restaurant, do a money talk for your staff. So yeah, and then you can also find me on the socials under @tippedfinance. I mostly hang out on Instagram. I try to make financial literacy fun. I like to do memes. I do some stand-up here in New York City, so I post some of my stand-up clips about personal finance. And yeah, I'd love to connect.
That's amazing. So now it's time for our famous 5 questions. Question number 1, what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Most impactful lesson I've learned in life. Learning is a lifelong obligation. You have to keep learning.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
Grit.
If you had to change someone's life with one book, which book would you recommend?
Outside of my own, I'm reading a book right now called The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control. And for entrepreneurs who are really maybe that A-type personality, I think this is a good one. It's a good one.
All right. I have to add that to the list. I haven't heard. That's the first time I heard that one before. All righty. What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm trying to be an advocate for people who are lower and middle income. And the biggest policy change I'd love to see is doing away with that subminimum wage. It's one thing I'm really trying to work on and make connections to be able to do. But I'd like to be an advocate for people to say, like, it doesn't matter if you're low income or middle income. Retirement is something that is possible for you. And, you don't have to save and invest what a person who makes $100,000 saves and invests because you don't live that lifestyle. And so retirement is just as possible for you. And it's something that you can absolutely achieve. So I like to give people hope.
And if someone wanted to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step that you recommend they take?
It's got to be the emergency fund. Invest in yourself.
That is all for our time here. Thanks again for all the advice. Thanks again for all the vulnerability and sharing your journey and being, as I said, there's not too many people that are doing what you're doing. And as you said, you're the first person I know to talk about, this, personal finance for this industry, for this niche. So you're definitely paving the way. So thanks again for hopping on. And I'd love to definitely stay connected.
Let's stay connected, Jen. I'm so excited to follow and see what you do. Have a great rest of your day.